Harley Sitner, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Great. Thank you, Will. I'm super excited to be here today.
Harley, you're 12 years into the ownership of Peace Vans, a business that you essentially resurrected and have subsequently turned into a beloved brand. So this is a story not just of financial success, but one where passion and business happily overlap. There's a lot to say on that point. We'll get there. But start us off, please, Harley, on how it was that you decided to go out and buy a business in the first place.
Sure. Thanks, Will. So the process of going out and buying a business, it really, you could argue it goes all the way back to my childhood and the impressions I got from my family, just seeing entrepreneurs around me. With that said, though, I was still kind of, always shuttled into a more conservative corporate path, or risk, just low risk tolerance path, even though I was actually had quite high risk tolerance. I actually got suspended in high school for gambling under the stairs, which my kid loves hearing that story over and over.
That's such a classic, future entrepreneur story.
It is, rolling the dice under the stairs, and then the principal and assistant principal just pounding on us and grabbing the money. And, we're just like, what just happened? And then, but really, it mostly started with a project. I worked at Microsoft for a bunch of years. I'm sure we'll talk more about my background and all that. But one of my general managers at the time was like, you're responsible for small business marketing for Windows, and you need to go talk to small business owners across the US. And so I did that. I took a couple of weeks and traveled to the Midwest and, the Southeast. And I don't know, I really just, I was just, my eyes were wide open to just the opportunity and the lifestyle and the variance that these companies, occupied. And it was super exciting and energizing to me. So I kind of came back from that trip and started thinking about, I think it's time for me to leave corporate life. And I always found corporate life somewhat unsettling.
Harley, just to interrupt, do you happen to remember any particular business owner or business that you saw on that trip that stands out?
Yeah, there was an HVAC guy. Classic as I've, looked through all your content, and I'm familiar with all the search industry now over the last 10 years, how that's all exploded in HVAC and the trades and roll up and PE, and it's a big deal. But at that point, I met this guy, and he must have had 30 or 40 people working for him. You could just tell he was making a lot of money. And, a lot of my small business, acquisition path was focused on financial. So I was just really intrigued with this guy. And I think it was Lawrence, Kansas. I visited some university towns. Pretty sure that one was Lawrence, Kansas. And just was amazed at this guy's attitude, his joy. He was just doing something very behind the scenes, like residential HVAC, and was moving into commercial. And so that was the one where I was just like, damn, this guy's got, this is a highly profitable business. He's in charge of his own schedule. He had a really interesting corporate culture he was nurturing, with his values at front and center. So that was kind of the one where I came back, and it was still a couple of years before I was actually able to exit Microsoft, but that one always stuck with me.
Well, it's funny, Harley, because there is a pattern among guests where many of them will have a moment where they realize that being a small business owner is actually this incredible path, and that small business owners do quite well because, of course, the picture of business success are the biggest possible names, the Elons and Zuckerbergs of the world. So that's kind of what the layperson thinks of when they think business success, and it takes exposure sometimes to the local HVAC owner to realize all the nooks and crannies where wealth is built in other ways. So
yeah, that was eye opening. I was also kind of new to I'm a very creative person, and I was a little worried about something so non-creative in a lot of ways. Would this satisfy my expressive desires? If I was into HVAC, and I started looking at a bunch of different potential companies.
And what year is this?
That would have been, I left Microsoft in 2007. So that would have been like 2004. 2004, I think, where, that trip. And because then, I spent another year in Windows and then did another job at Microsoft and finally pulled the trigger on my first small business acquisition in 2007.
Which we're going to hear about. But just for historical reference for people, 2004 was kind of, well, maybe not peak Microsoft, but close to peak Microsoft. It was pre-Web 2.0, so yep. Silicon Valley was still basically dead, and Microsoft was Google was certainly coming up, but in Amazon, I mean, these were names that were still around, but Microsoft was still the top dog in tech at that point. So you were really working
very
at
much
the creme de la creme. Yeah,
and I was working with the creme de la creme people. And on some super fascinating projects. Like I loved my time at Microsoft. I worked on very strategic, high-level projects. I presented to, Gates and Ballmer.
Really?
Yeah. And got yelled at like everyone does.
Oh, wow. How exciting.
Yeah, I mean.
Was Bill Gates rocking?
Yeah. I used to, I was in building 34 for a long time, and I had a lot of business on the 5th floor, which is where, they sat, and you run into them in the bathroom sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Running into Bill Gates at the urinal. What a thrill. Okay. So back to your motivations. Okay. So you get a taste for small business on this business trip. What else? Tell us more about how your motivations start shifting and taking shape.
Yeah. I mean, I was in my 30s, it was a really good opportunity, moment. Like my wife and I didn't have children. We were, in a financially sound place. It felt like a great moment to start taking some more risks. And I was really, as much as I loved what I was doing at Microsoft and was seeing success there, I joke about, like those 3 a.m. emails from Steve Ballmer, it's just like, like something wasn't connecting with that, as well as, just one too many PowerPoints. As this just wasn't the nature, as intellectually interesting as the work could be, just the rigmarole around some of the work, I was just like, this just is not, the right thing for me.
I mean, it sounds like you were kind of a classic case of chafing at the constraints of corporate life, having a boss, not being very autonomous at the end of the day. Right?
Yeah. Oh, very much so. I mean, even though I had some, there obviously wasn't remote work at that time at Microsoft, but I still had some liberties, and, I was treated really well, and they respected me, and I was someone they wanted to keep and nurture and grow. But yeah, it really wasn't, it just wasn't, where I saw myself. And then the real, I don't talk about this a lot because I'm not really a financially motivated person, but the opportunity for true wealth generation is somewhat limited in those environments. And then the amount of like effort and the trade-offs you have to make to really like move up that wealth generation ladder are quite high in those organizations. And I just didn't really have it. I felt like, I had it intellectually and work ethic wise, but it's more that emotional investment to, this is how I'm going to spend the next 10, 15 years to try to generate wealth for myself and my family. It seemed like there was a more fun path to pursue.
Yeah. But, and just, you say of yourself that you're not very money motivated or wealth motivated, but in fact, I'm also hearing that you are, because you do want to have a career where you've generated something that could be called wealth. Yeah,
there's no question. There's certain things I want. My wife always jokes like, well, you just wear the same clothes every day. I just bought my 3rd pair of shoes, like I only owned 2 pair of shoes prior to that. Yeah, I'm fairly simple. But there's things I want. I want to be able to retire. I want to, be able to travel. But I really, my needs are, I'm more of a minimalist in that way.
Yeah.
So I'm not pursuing an IPO or, a PE buyout necessarily, with Peace Fans.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. One other phrase you used in our pre-call that grabbed me was wondering about how to be the quote guy in the coffee shop. What did you mean?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I was we moved to Seattle in 2002, and then prior to that, we were in San Francisco where there was that cafe culture. So I'd like at least 15 years inhabiting cafes. And I went to school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where there was, cafe culture too. So I just always loved working in cafes. And in Seattle, it was actually early 2000s. There was a coterie of people that worked in, the cafe. And I was always just like, who are those people? Like, what are they doing? And, like, that's so interesting. Like, I want that. I want to be that person in the cafe. And there are two motivations there. One was an ego thing. I always thought those people must be doing something super cool. And I was like, I wanted to be seen as super cool. But number two, it was this fantasy around controlling my time and my schedule. That was really one of the hardest things about, the corporate world was just the constraints of, even though, I could show up at 8 or 8:15 or 8:20 or 7:30, I still had to show up every day. And the expectations were kind of there. You're there till 4, 5, 6, and the traffic and the commute and just all that rigmarole. Like this idea of being the guy in the cafe, and I could just go and hang out and kind of socialize. And, I just always fantasized about that.
Well, being the guy on his laptop all day in the cafe is still a thing, but it's probably, if you had that experience today, it would probably be the guy in the coffee shop in Bali on his laptop.
Yes.
Because now you got to add the digital nomad layer to the fantasy.
Which I kind of, having spent 2 years traveling, the world in my 20s, I kind of I kind of wish I had, like, that had been a thing when I was sort of, I could have combined my nomadic instincts with my remote work thing. So,
yeah. So what was the straw? And tell us about your first business acquisition.
Yeah. So the straw was really, I was working at Microsoft. It was such a fun job. I was traveling around the world. I was meeting with ministers of government. We went to Botswana for a project. And as we're in the car from the airport to the hotel, the radio came on. Representatives from Microsoft are on Gaborone this week and I was like, whoa, that's us, even though, like, all that was happening and it was really like a super fun project at that time. Like, I had a brilliant manager, but she was also like a grinder. She the work expectation. It was super intense. And I was like, I'm getting pretty burned out here. And I started looking. I started just really researching small businesses. At that time, there weren't a lot of resources. There were some brokers, which I always joke. I made a joke for years about if, my next career is going to be help reinvent the small business brokerage space, which a lot of people have done over this 10 years. But at that point, it was like the Wall Street Journal had some website that I think is still active, Biz Buy Sell. And there's some brokers that, like, I knew much more than the brokers. It really wasn't a great experience. But I started just hunting things down and, like, looking at things, and I had some criteria. And so I looked at some really interesting companies initially.
And Harley, just before we hear more about that, first of all, quick aside, the small business brokerage space hasn't actually changed that much.
I didn't want to insult the audience, but I that is my instinct, that it is still ripe for, disruption.
At Microsoft, or being in tech, the obvious place to consider being an entrepreneur is in doing some tech startup. Buying a small business is still a pretty unusual option. So how did you leapfrog over, door A to go into door B?
That's a great question. And because a lot of my peers, even to this date, when they leave Microsoft, Amazon, Google, wherever they are, Facebook, wherever they are, they do move into the familiar space of tech. I was just violently opposed to it. I have a degree in computer science. I have an MBA, both from top institutions. I had all the skills and the background. I'd done, I'd raised capital. I'd done startups. I really wanted something visceral and something I could touch. I was really hungry for that. I'd been going to Burning Man for a bunch of years and had been somewhat involved in the maker culture. And this idea of like building things and touching things, and the physical world was really, really compelling to me. And also customers. I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs, taxonomy, and the E in me, the extrovert in me, really just the idea of like, I was at Microsoft, I was sure I drank the Kool-Aid, like your products are going to touch 1 billion people. Yeah, but I'm never going to hug any of them. And like, to me, I'd rather hug 100 people than serve 1 billion people. And so that was so tech was really off the plate for me. Even like, kind of hybrid things like technology consulting. Like, I just didn't want to do anything with tech. I really wanted to try something different and build new skills and be in a different vibrational space, if you will, if I can delve into new age speak for a moment.
Sure, Mr. Burning Man, absolutely. Peace fans.
I know it is kind of I do fit a lot of cliches. So,
Harley, one of the things that many of my guests may experience if they're coming from some high-flying corporate role, either in tech or in consulting or in private equity or something, is they have to reconcile a little bit the status change.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And one of the things is about one of kind of under that umbrella of status is impact, working on big things or working on things that everybody knows or for a brand that everybody knows. And I've never heard, but what they often learn or they already realize, and that's part of the reason they decide to go down this path, is that you can either touch a lot of people barely, or you can touch fewer people, but really impact them. And so that's kind of I can imagine sort of a 2x2 matrix there somehow.
Oh, very much so.
And small business is an option for that, where you're touching fewer people, but you're able to have much more of a relationship with them, a better impact on them. So you're closer to them. Anyway, this is all kind of stating the obvious, but you just made a beautiful bumper sticker out of that concept. What is it? Yeah, you could work for products that touch 1 billion people, but I'll never be able to hug any of them. That is just perfectly captures this concept.
Yeah. And that is, on even my toughest days at Peace Fans, that is the most redeeming or rejuvenating or re-energizing component of the job. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure, further on in the conversation. Like, there's a lot of hard days in a small business, and that connection to the customer is just the most re-fulfilling component of it. And it really is, like, we hug so many of our customers. And that was the hardest thing about COVID. I think there's an interview somewhere with me. I know exactly. It was Brian. I'm not going to say his last name, but it was a gentleman from Rhode Island. He's a professor at Brown. He was the first customer post-COVID that we hugged. And I distinctly remember that. It was, like we were kind of like masks were coming off, people were vaccinated. And while COVID was great for our business, it was also like devastating emotionally, as it was for everyone. But I remember when Brian and his family flew out from Rhode Island, picked up their camper van, and like we kind of looked at each other, and like he was an old VW guy, and there's this deep connection there. And it's like we were both kind of mutually, like the instinct was to hug. And we'd both been like, everyone had been out of that mode for so long. And then we hugged, and I was like, okay, this feels really good again.
That's great, Harley. That's really great.
Yeah.
So it's not just a metaphor about hugging your customers.
It is literal. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Let's hear about what were those criteria you were about to tell us about, those loose criteria for your first business acquisition.
Yeah. So the loose criteria for the first business acquisition, I really wanted something that enabled the lifestyle. Like maybe I could be in the cafe, maybe I could have some flexibility around the schedule. I was very industry agnostic, and I was really proud about that. I looked at a small company that manufactured docks here in Seattle. Really interesting. And I applied some classic business criteria. I was looking for like barriers to entry. I wasn't really focused on an EBITDA number or profitability number. I wanted like barriers to entry. I wanted enabler of kind of flexibility of like schedule. And I wanted some, what I could see is some, growth, whether there was an untapped market or there were adjacent markets, or there was something perhaps that could align with skills that I had. I wasn't naive enough to be like I can just go do anything. Like, is there something I can do, like unique to my skill set? So that was like the loose set of criteria. And then obviously there's kind of the financial. I didn't have a lot of money. So what could I qualify for? What could I actually purchase? And what could I kind of support?
And why do you think that how much the business was earning mattered to you so little?
I just believe
it's usually criteria number one.
I believed in my skills that I'd be able to sort of, if I understood the strategy and the market dynamics, that I would be able to sort of grow it and build it. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for like, the unpolished gem that I could then grab and polish and, grow and shine. Or
wow. Well, boy, did you find it, and boy, did that come true.
Yeah.
Although not until your second acquisition.
Yeah, exactly. It took a while, and I learned some incredibly valuable lessons in that first round of sort of acquisition.
Well, let's hear that story in brief. So what did you find this first acquisition?
So in brief, it was a company called Coast Nurseries, and it was a flower brokerage company. So it was one person, and he was the middleman. He was a broker, which I was fascinated with that business model. Very, both high risk and low risk at the same time. And I really understood the business model. He had some very key accounts, one of them being Walmart. And then he had, suppliers locked down. He had some key accounts locked down. And his business was like highly flexible. He could do it from anywhere. There were significant, like intense moments around Easter, Valentine's Day, Christmas, a few other holidays. But then there was a lot of downtime, which was really, really interesting to me. He had some suppliers in Hawaii, which was compelling to me, to, travel to the islands. And I thought, like I could have conversations with buyers at Walmart, with my corporate skills and my MBA and all of that. And I thought he had vastly underinvested in technology. And I thought there was, despite what we were talking about earlier, my aversion to technology, I knew that my comfort with technology, my ability to deploy it in a sort of ossified small business would be a lever I could pull. So I looked at that and I was like, this kind of fits all the criteria. I felt that the owner training would be excellent. And we structured a deal with an earnout for him. So, I pulled the trigger on that.
But Harley, you said it was a one-man business. So you were essentially buying a book of business from this guy.
Very much so.
And when you talk about it being tech backward, or no tech, and deploying tech into the business, which is classic playbook, but really we're just talking about the extent to which this lone individual was using technology and how you would use it better or use it more than he was.
But he was doing, there's a lot of volume flowing through his small business. Like we were supplying every Easter lily to every Walmart west of the Mississippi. Wow. So, you're looking at like 65, 53-foot trailers of Easter lilies, and managing the distribution and the logistics and, Walmart and their buying requirements and their technology interfaces. And they were increasingly pushing on suppliers to become more sophisticated with technology and dropping suppliers who couldn't meet it. And I knew like I would have no problem sort of implementing whatever technology requirements they threw at me and probably surpassing them along with the other sort of, customers. So, but it was
with accounts like that, Harley, we're not going to spend too much on this story, but with an account like that, how do you see growth? Just more account? I mean, it seems to be about the biggest account somebody like that could possibly land. So it seems like, was there much meat on the bone in the industry left?
There was. There's a lot of adjacent markets, just other floral items. And then just having the Walmart account at that volume, like blew away, both sides of the marketplace. I was able to open doors at Walgreens, at Rite Aid, Home Depot. Other companies would take you incredibly seriously when you're like, I'm the Easter lily guy for Walmart. Like that. There's no at that point in time, oh, you go to Bentonville and you do blah, blah, blah. That is the ultimate sort of, calling card. So it was a real door opener and I think there was a sales book back in that time called Anchors of Diamond, something like that. It was this notion of like having like a real anchor client. And Walmart was that for that business.
Really fascinating. So what happened?
And what I learned out of that was it wasn't the business for me. It was successful. I mean, to your point, it was some of my growth ideas just weren't panning out. And I was kind of, I was about 4 or 5 years in and I had the lifestyle I wanted. The business had mostly plateaued. I wasn't working on it that much. And I was like, this isn't the thing. I think,
so you did it for 4 or 5 years. I didn't realize from a pre-call how long your stint in that was.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, and even it might have been like 6 or 7 because I think the out years it was very little. We were just cherry picking the best accounts, the best deals, the things we could be operationally excellent in, and just taking all that margin. And I think there were just a lot of things were missing for me. And this is kind of what I learned, number one, like I was a lone wolf, which, as we said earlier, for the extrovert in me, that just did not work. As much as I wanted to be the guy in the cafe alone working, I kind of learned about myself, like, this is not me. I really need, for you. Yeah, I really need the team and I really, wanted to build culture too, and my values. And I wasn't able to do that. So I kind of had a bit of a, come to Jesus around like, maybe this isn't the thing. And then the whole idea of being industry agnostic was another learning for me too. I am a sales and marketing person. Despite having technology background and finance and, operations, like really my core skill set is sales and marketing. And really, the nursery wholesale business, it was a B2B play. And there was no, sales, there were some sales, but they were like strategic sales. They weren't hug sales. In fact, if I tried to hug the buyer at Walmart, I would have gotten thrown out of there.
Not the vibes in Bentonville?
No, not at all.
But financially though, as a business, it was working?
It was working, but we had plateaued, but it was working. Definitely. I sort of understood the model, activated the model. But there are some dynamics at play too with, retailer consolidation. There's some consolidation on the supply side, on the nursery side. Some of them were like, well, why are we using a broker? Maybe we can go direct. Yeah, I could see some things around the corner. Plus, I was like, this isn't really the business for me.
Yeah. But it had turned out to be the business you bought was the business that it ended up being. And kind of strictly objectively, it carried on the way it was supposed to. But these other factors meant that you were kind of over
and I think
frankly.
There's a lot of lessons in there for your listeners too about there's a moment in time where you're just kind of like maybe this isn't, even though this is kind of working, like maybe there's another swing at this, another small business.
I wonder how somebody finally makes the decision. Was there a straw in that story where you really decided to move on? Because that must have been a pretty big decision.
Yeah,
you
it
had
was.
This business that was working. It was supporting you. And were you going to be able to sell it? Did you have a loan on it?
Yeah, no, it was paid off. And I think at that point I realized it had plateaued. It wasn't sort of satisfying a lot of needs I had. And it actually dovetailed with, overlapped with my acquisition of Peace Fans.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, here's the next thing. And I really need to turn my attention to this,
I see. So you kind of had a little bit of overlap in there where you went looking for your next thing while you kept flowers going.
Yeah. And I didn't really, I was looking for my next thing, but the Peace Fans thing, it wasn't as though I, turned that up in a search. It was more of, I discovered it as part of just organic living.
Yeah. And we're just about to hear that, but, anything to tell searchers about the flower brokerage business that you haven't already? It's always fun to use these these interviews as an opportunity to educate the audience on the industry or the business that the guest bought into. Is flower brokerage still a thing? If you want to be a lone wolf, is it still a fit for that type of personality?
Yeah, very much so. I do think it's got to be a very personality driven. Like my personality did not fit that business. I wanted to be out front, spokesperson, marketing, and in hindsight, there's no opportunity for that in a B2B business. And but I do think the brokerage model, there's a lot of risk associated with it, disruption on both ends of the market. But if you can lock it down, I mean, we were like incredibly asset light. We had a couple servers.
Was it always just you, or did you end up hiring anybody?
I had a partner in it. She was my CFO because, there's a fair amount of money sluicing through it. And there's a lot of complexity, with the operations around meeting, these supplier requirements. I mean, I could tell stories about the paperwork we had to do in the first few years with Walmart. I mean, like roomfuls of paperwork and triplicate with dot matrix printers, and it was crazy. So, but yeah, I think the brokerage models they're fascinating business models, and still I
always like them.
Yeah. And, you have to be really on your toes and constantly innovating and outsmarting your competition and staying one step ahead of both sides of whatever you're brokering. But the asset light nature of them can be super lucrative.
One of the things that draws people, maybe not to search as much as maybe independent sponsorship and private equity, is deal making, the act of doing a deal. And I always feel like brokerage is kind of doing it's the business of doing deals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, that was, I was missing that, the hug quotient. Mm-hmm. Like no one wanted, I mean, the flower growers were huggers. Some of those hippies in Hawaii growing their orchids, there's a lot of hugging going on there.
Okay. Oh, perfect segue then. Okay. How do you find Peace Vans? What is it? Let's hear your origin story with this business.
Yeah. So Peace Vans is, the origin, I just love it. I mean, it's the classic. I don't know your demographics of your audience, but there's a famous Super Bowl commercial years ago. Victor Kiam, I think he owned the New England Patriots at the time. And he had a razor company, Remington Razors. And he's like, I loved the company so much, I went out and bought it. So Peace Vans, in 2010, my daughter was born. And I'd always had a passion for, the Volkswagen community. I'd always fetishized the camper vans and wanted one, and never pulled the trigger. And, I went to all these Grateful Dead shows in the 90s and traveled Baja, and just that whole thing. I always wanted one, but never quite pulled the trigger. After my daughter was born, I was like, I want her to really have easy access to the outdoors and camping. And that's like, I think and I wanted an escape pod. I was like, I think now's the time to buy a VW camper van. So I went out and sourced one, and they were just starting to become popular again in 2010.
And Harley, give us a mental image for those of us who have not been exposed to this particular subculture. What exactly is the camper van?
Yeah, so Volkswagen, they made a bunch of different versions of these vans, starting in I think 1952 or 3 is the first time they came to the U.S. Little buses, little micro buses. And then they outfitted them to camper vans, from the 50s into the 60s, into the 70s, and into the 80s. And so the 80s era's ones were, in theory, the most technically advanced. Although by 2010, they were, 30 years old. So these are little vans, seat 4 or 5 people. They have a pop top on them with a little bed that sleeps 2 people. Oftentimes they have little kitchen galleys in them, and for a sink, a stove, a fridge. The seats swivel around, and you can go camping in them. And it's kind of, like a little escape pod. So,
and you sleep in the.
Yep.
If you're one of the 2 people, it actually sleeps 2 people.
They will sleep 4 people. The lower bed the lower seat folds into a bed, and then the pop top has a ability to sleep 2 people.
And they're pretty compact. This is not an RV.
Very much. They're the anti-RV. They can be daily drivers. They can fit in garages. And they just have that whole ethos. The VW camper, I imagine there's some in your audience that don't know what they are, but it's probably one of the most iconic brands ever. That
well, you'd certainly know it if you saw it.
Yes.
It might not. You might not have the mental image, but you immediately recognize if you saw it. It's basically a symmetrical.
Yeah.
Right. Front to back symmetrical.
Yep. And they
rounded,
were they were round in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Then they went square in the 80s, and then now they just brought one back in 2024, and it's round again. There's the definition of subculture is Volkswagen camper van. That is one of the most iconic subcultures that exists.
Oh, great. Okay, great. I'm feeling very out of touch here. This is a good education. Okay, Harley. So you decide it's time finally for you to buy your own coveted camper van.
So I buy my own Volkswagen camper van, and like the very first day it breaks down, which is a very common experience. If you just Google breakdowns VW camper vans, you'll see like 8 million Google hits on that. And I kind of struggled to find a good shop. You know, like I was in Seattle. A lot of my friends had these. You see them driving around frequently. And I just, like, cause I'd call a shop, they wouldn't call me back. They didn't have a website, they just nothing. And so I found one shop, in South Seattle, and it was called Peace Vans. And I got my van there, and it was a terrible experience. Bad service. I think I picked up my van the first time and it broke down like 2 blocks away, and pushed it back. It was terrible. And, so I kind of like,
but it was a garage. It was a repair shop specifically for camper vans.
Very much. Yeah, that was it. That's all they did.
So the market is big enough where you can have a shop, even if they gave you terrible service.
Yep.
Devoted just to this subculture, just to this one vehicle.
And in most West Coast metro areas, there is several shops that specialize in these. A lot of times they'll work on other Volkswagens as well too. In Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, LA, there is volume to support dedicated like camper van shops.
Okay.
And then, we'll get into this more, but nowadays people bring their vehicles from all over the country to us. We became kind of the best of the best. And so we're not so dependent on a local market.
And just to jumping ahead a little bit, you service, but you also sell.
Yeah, we sell, we repair. Yeah, we do. We'll get into we have 6 different lines of business now at Peace Vans.
Okay, great. So you take them, you take your own van to this shop and get horrible service. You have to literally turn your van back around and to have them fix it again.
Yep. And that went on for about 2 years.
Okay.
And, at that time, the shop was getting bad reviews, and, I could tell the owner just wasn't having a good time. And, like I just heard the grapevine, he was going to close, or he was maybe going to try to sell it. And I was like, that could be actually really interesting. It was like the revenue was teeny, everything about it was teeny tiny. But I was like, I was really, really attracted to it for emotional reasons.
Mm-hmm. Because it was this right in the heart of this subculture that you yourself were.
Yeah. And I was just, I don't know. I just was like, I loved the customers. I loved the culture. And I was like, I could really see myself being in charge of this and growing this. And I started running numbers and writing business plans and talking to, strategic advisors I have in my network and thinking it through. And, I was just like, this is actually like, could be a super interesting thing to have. I kind of thought it would be a side hustle, to be honest, or one of many small businesses I might own. Being honest, I did not think this was going to turn into, I knew it had the potential, but I did not think at that moment it could turn into what I've turned it into.
Well, we'll want to hear about that. And that is my first reflex, putting aside your affinity for the concept, the culture, the brand, just the TAM, the total addressable market of this seems very small. And effectively what you were buying was a repair shop. I mean, I assume it was kind of a repair shop with a single lift and a mechanic. And that's basically what the business was.
It wasn't an easy purchase because negotiating with an unsophisticated owner is actually quite difficult. And actually was quite time consuming. But what I bought was very, very little. But, I think the lesson here for your listeners is the passion, my gut. I really followed my gut with this one. Something really resonated as true. And while you're right, the total addressable market, ostensibly as presented in the current instantiation of the business was quite small. Intellectually, based on my strategic thinking skills and my knowledge, I knew there was a lot more to it. I didn't know what the rest of the chessboard looked like, but I knew there was opportunity here, and there was enough to build on to create the revenue and EBITDA base to keep investing to go after that.
Yeah, and I guess there's a joy equity or joy EBITDA that we should joy quotient. I mean, you were going to be enjoying this work and this culture, so that's worth something, right? So whatever the EBITDA doesn't reach, the joy quotient gets you there.
And I talk about that all the time. I actually talk about that with my customers, because a lot of times, especially on the classic Volkswagens, the desire or the investment they're about to make is a highly irrational economic decision. like it makes
because the car breaks down so much.
Yeah, or it's not going to be worth it. You're going to go on the restoration side. You're going to go drop 50, 60, 75 or more thousands of dollars into this vehicle, and it will not be worth that when you pick up.
Yeah,
you are upside down in this, but it's like there's no possible way to measure that. And it's really kind of incredible, to be able to, and when customers get that, they get that.
Yeah. Harley, I want to get into the weeds a little bit. If you can recall, how you structured the acquisition. So you've said that he was unsophisticated, which is common for my listeners. Will be well aware of that dynamic. You've said that he was also, you'd heard through the grapevine that he was on the cusp of just shutting it down. So maybe on the latter point there, I think is where maybe a little bit there's more to teach. Everybody here listening knows that often the other side of the table is going to be pretty unsophisticated. But this idea of buying a business where the person might just shut it down, how do you possibly value that? It's making no money, so it's hard to come up with a financial valuation. You got to, I guess, offer him enough that it's worth his time to go through the process instead of just, shutting the door. On the other hand, in your own mind, you're like, well, if this guy's going to just shut it down, it should be, if I give him $1, it should be worth. He should take it because it's more than he'll otherwise get. So how did you handle that negotiation?
It came down to my emotional gut, and it was a tough one. You're right, because intellectually it's like, go ahead and shut it down. Like I'll just pick up the assets for $1, or there's like I can just recreate what you have.
Right.
But there's a lot of time required to do that. And I wanted to keep his core team. He had 2 mechanics that were decent and a service writer who was excellent. He had a really interesting lease that I wanted to take over. There were a few assets there that I was like, this is worth kind of going through the process, and actually negotiating and putting some money together. But valuation was, I've done a lot of valuation, and like it was hard to really value a business that was actually like losing money, and his sense of the assets were inflated. But at the end of the day, I just came with some cash and was like, here, this is like a very fair offer. You go get some legal counsel and review this.
So you basically offered him all cash, lump sum. And can you tell us what that number was?
I think we ended up, half of it was I'd have to really remember. I think maybe it was like $100,000 in cash, and maybe like there's like $50,000 he could earn out over like a year or two. Which none of that was ever realized because it was just structured differently. So it was about $100,000 in cash, which is kind of crazy objectively. Like
crazy that you gave him so much. Yeah, actually.
Yeah. My lawyer was like, "What the fuck? What? Like it's not worth. This is not worth $100,000." I was like, "I don't care. I really want it. I think to revive it from like bankruptcy or like close is like it's going to take 6 months and." And there's going to be weird stuff legally, and let's just, I'm happy to write the check and make it a generous check so he quickly moves out of the picture and doesn't get in the way in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
Harley, I think your story is going to be a hard one to learn from because, it's kind of like gut versus rationality.
Yeah.
And we all, and it goes well beyond business. We all struggle with that tension between what our gut says and our rationality says in many decisions in life. And one of the things that we hear in this world is how careful you as business buyer need to be that you don't fall in love with a business that you're considering. Because it is easy to, one comes across, you see all the potential, you imagine yourself being in that business, you fall in love with that vision, and you either lose it and you're devastated, or your enthusiasm blinded you to some obvious red flags, and now you've bought a terrible business, which is a nightmare. Meanwhile, we got your story where you overpaid for a failing business and it's worked out marvelously. So hard to know what to...
I mean, I think the risk of the size of check I wrote was so low.
Well, that's excellent point. Yeah.
I mean,
the downside here was $100,000.
Yeah. Exactly. If it had been like a couple million, like there's no way, with there's zero, the rational side of me would have absolutely taken over. But at that level, and I saw the opportunity, I viscerally experienced the opportunity, and I was like, for $100,000, like this is like, let's just roll with this, see what we can do with it. And, and it's kind of like, and I think there is a lesson in there. It's like, like sometimes, I mean, it was right in front of me. It was a unique experience, hard to replicate, but I just went for it. I mean, it was a gut decision, and that's hard to do with a couple $1 million. But I think some of your audience are looking at smaller acquisitions, and I'm not advocating like go 100% with your gut. Absolutely. But I was able to basically do that in this situation.
Well, it's your point about the capital you were putting at risk is the key point, that the downside here was limited to $100,000. And oh, by the way, you also had an existing income from the flower brokerage business, right?
Yeah. And at that point I was still young enough where, I could have jumped back into the corporate world if I had to. Yeah. I joke now that I'm just not employable. I'm too old.
Yeah.
But at that point, I was kind of, that was not what I wanted to do. I kind of,
okay, so that was March 2013?
Yeah, March of 2013. And, we talked about this in the pre-interview. Like one of the key lessons I learned was we closed on March 28th. And there was 3 days left in the quarter. And the amount of like effort to like incorporate, pay taxes, quarterlies of like 6 cents, 8 cents, 14 cents was astronomical. We should have closed on April 1. So small learning.
So don't close close to the end of a quarter.
No, I still remember that being like, oh my God, we didn't know how to do anything. The processes weren't there. I didn't really have a team in place. The amount of effort to close and file for like pennies was pretty funny.
Well, 300 plus episodes in, and I have not yet heard that particular tip. So noted. Thank you. Well, Harley, so that was 12 years ago. Obviously, we have about 20 minutes left in our conversation. So we are going to cover 12 years and 20 minutes, actually. But you're going to have to guide me a little bit. Maybe let's jump to the end. Tell us what Peace Fans has become. And then let's jump back and kind of what were the big pivot points and learnings, the giant ones over this 12-year journey.
Absolutely.
What does Peace Fans look like today?
So today, Peace Fans it's awesome. I mean, it's stressful. There's no, like, even like today, I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Like I signed a big contract and then a competitor called me from Europe being like, I've got better. And I was like, well, oh my God, I just signed this contract 24 hours ago, but right now Peace Fans is awesome. I mean, just I have an amazing team. The amount of hugs we give are extraordinary, daily. We have 6 different lines of businesses. I think about the business lines and like, kind of think about growth, risk, and margin. That's kind of how I evaluate them. Like, what's the growth opportunity? Like, low, mid, high, what's the risk profile of it? And then what's sort of the margin structure of that business? and a bit of like BCG thinking. I think there's probably a BCG matrix around that I kind of copied or modified to my own. And we've got a really good mix of businesses. We have some low growth, mid margin, but like low risk. Those are your cash cows, basically.
Harley, can you give us your 6 and then
yeah, absolutely.
How do they measure up against this matrix?
Yep. So the 6 businesses, we have Peace Vans Vintage, which is our classic Volkswagen repair and restoration shop. And that is, the low growth, there's just not that many of them. But, the margin is solid. We understand the business. We operate it really efficiently. And the risk is low. We know what we're doing. There's not a lot of like motion in the business. Then we have 2 businesses around modern vehicles. We have one, that's the Peace Vans Modern, which is the high growth business. That's building modern camper vans for Mercedes and Volkswagen. Really moving into the 8 figures there on revenue for those businesses. So high growth, relatively high risk because it's kind of an active competitive landscape. Dealing with OEMs is kind of high risk. And we're, the margin structure is, it's decent. Then we have a business where we service those vehicles, like modern camper vans. We don't work on RVs, but more like vans, if you will. That's a pretty high growth business. We've only been in that about a year and a half. The margin structure is solid. It's not amazing because the parts side of that, you're really scaling on labor. And that's not a great business model. And the risk profile is relatively low because our brand position is amazing and we can just cherry pick business, all day long.
Harley, let me stop you on the labor and parts thing. So in your service, any service shop makes money on labor and parts. And what you just said is it's better to be positioned where you're selling a lot of parts that you can mark up a lot than labor. But so just say more about that dynamic to educate us on how this works.
Yeah. I mean, labor scales linearly, parts,
sure.
And other components, other parts of business models scale non-linearly. We're not going to get into the software kind of margin structure. But like if you're solely focused on labor as the driver of your business, you just have to add more people. And like maybe you can figure out some economies of scale there, but it is quite hard. And in the classic car business, there is much more opportunity in parts because we can sort of, we can manufacture our own parts and control the cost structure on those. Or for example, we can go over to Europe and buy every single one of these for the whole year. And then we can mark it up a little more aggressively, if you will, because, we own them all. But on the modern service business, which are these little, camper van RVs you see everywhere now, the vendors there, they're just, there's not as much margin in those as there's in the classic cars.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Then we have a business called Peace Vans Electric, where we convert classic air-cooled, mostly Volkswagens into electric vehicles. Super high growth, super high risk, margin unknown. And so I love businesses like that. I love adding these are the bets, the future bets. We don't really understand the margin structure, but I really believe that the market is significant, market size is significant. And so we're just investing, money and team into those projects. And we have a few very high profile projects with celebrities, brands that are really cool and will accrue total value to the brand. And I'll talk about the brand in a minute. And then we have the modern businesses. We have rentals, Peace Vans Rentals. So we actually rent camper vans, both here in Seattle, Washington for Pacific Northwest trips. And also we have 5 vans in Southern Baja, California that we rent. That business is low growth, healthy margin, and it's kind of the risk profile has changed over time. It used to be low risk, but the competitive landscape has shifted a ton. With some peer-to-peer marketplaces, just a proliferation of owner-operators. So that's become a much more competitive environment. And then we own an app called Seeker, S-E-K-R, and that we could do a whole nother episode on Seeker. But it's really, it's about sort of finding campgrounds and campsites and connecting with other road trippers. And it's something that I acquired. The opportunity presented itself, and I sort of picked up the assets of that and relaunched it. But
it's sort of a social network for this community.
It is. It's like it's the digital infrastructure for your physical van life, if you will. And I have a technology background, and it's kind of a full circle moment where I was like this summer as I was working with the dev team, I was like, I'm back doing this again. But it was okay. It was the subject matter was fascinating, so I didn't mind it so much. But ultimately, Will, at the end of the day, what we have at Peace Friends is a brand. And it's that's kind of the seventh business that I think about. And, a lot of times I talk to the team, really what we're building here at Peace Friends is a brand. And a brand gives you the opportunity to do all these other things. The electric conversion business, we couldn't do that if we didn't have the brand. People aren't going to write me $100,000 check on kind of unproven technology unless they really trust us and love us. So what we have at Peace Friends is a really potent brand. People love us. They trust us. They want to do the next thing that we do. And that was our Baja rentals. That sells out, very quickly because people are just looking for more Peace Friends experiences because we built this trust over time. So, now I have this platform and it's just kind of what are we going to do next? It's really a wonderful position to be in.
That's such a good, that's such a good articulation of the value of brand, Harley. I mean, there's no lack of books written about what the value of brand, but I'm not sure I've heard that articulated where that brand as platform, and it allows you to accelerate the launch of new products. I mean, it's totally obvious as I repeat it back to you, but it's a really good conceptualization of it. I love that. Did you have that vision?
No.
Did you set out to build this incredibly strong brand?
No. I knew I could, and that's what I love doing. I didn't. It was really, I say it's about the second year of Peace Friends. I was like, oh my God, people love this brand. I mean, people just love it. And I was like, oh, this is what we're building here. Yeah, we have all these physical components to the business, and at the end of the day, really, and I kind of know from my background, like brands are acquired at multiples of, the brand multiplier can be a really strong multiplier when it's time to sell. So I do have that going back full circle to when I talk about, I'm not really interested in money or wealth. I kind of like in the back of my mind, I'm like, the brand is like super, super valuable. I continue to invest in it, A, because it's fun, but B, because I've recognized that it has tremendous value.
The value of a consumer brand, I think, is maybe this is obvious again, is far more valuable. There's something about the product that lends itself to a great brand. It'd be hard to build so much brand value into an HVAC business, even if they're trying. I mean, there are definitely PE dollars going into building local HVAC brands, but it's still never going to have the passion around it. So you got to also choose the right product or category if you're interested in building a brand. And basically, it's got to be consumer, if nothing else.
Yeah,
right?
and that's a kind of a learning, I think, for some of your listeners, perhaps, is like how much of your like emotional being is, and I'm sure, and I've listened to some of your episodes where you do dive into this, where how much of your emotional being needs to be aligned with this acquisition.
Yeah.
And some of it has to do with, how much your emotional being is aligned to skill sets. So for me, being a sales and marketer, being a vocal external spokesperson, we didn't talk about, I had a kind of a failed business in the middle there, a skincare company, where I helped some friends start a skincare company. I loved the idea. I really thought this was a brilliant idea, but it was a brand of skincare focused on women and focused on actually basically like intimate grooming. And I could not be a sales and marketing person for that. It had to be a woman-led brand. My partners had to be front and center, but I couldn't apply my best skill set of sales and marketing because it was just highly inappropriate to be the brand spokesperson for that. So I think there's that notion of, if you really feel that you have these core skills around sales, marketing, branding, and you want to keep exercising those and compounding the value that you have in those, you really should be thinking about your acquisition providing an avenue for you to apply those. And that was something I learned with the nursery business. I couldn't do that. And my best, most awesome skills just sat on the sideline.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I also remember you saying in the pre-call about HVAC, like when you first set out, you could see yourself doing an HVAC, buying an HVAC business. So you were open-minded, as we talked about at the top.
Very much so.
But upon reflection, you now realize that, and you may have been successful doing that, but it would not have been the highest and best use of your personal talents. So I guess the takeaway for the audience is not necessarily go build a brand, but be aware of what your skills are and find a business that leverages your particular skills. In Harley Sitner's case, it happens to be brand.
Yes.
Marketing, creative.
Yep, 100%. And you're right. I mean, if that is not something you're passionate about and have skills around and have demonstrated success in or are curious around, then do not do it, because you will fail. Go look at the HVAC company, but if you really feel like brand is your thing, and really think hard about something with a consumer element to it, so you can really flex into that, as the kids say these days.
Well, speaking of the kids, and neither of us being among them, you and Peace fans, you remind me of, and I'm sure you've heard these comparisons before, a little bit of, Harley to Peace fans as Steve Jobs to Apple, as Ben and Jerry to Ben and Jerry's. Mm-hmm. It's kind of old school. I don't feel like, kind of hippie. I feel like hippie culture is on the downswing. But kind of old school California, West Coast, hippie vibe, and leader of business as frontman, bringing his own personal passion and interest into it. And and the kind of the hippie thing. I don't know if that's something that hippies do, because you could imagine a world in which it wasn't always hippie, but both Steve Jobs and you and Ben and Jerry's all have that kind of similar vibe. Yeah,
very much so. And if you sort of plumb the internet, I did a TEDx talk maybe 10, 12 years ago on like founder-led organizations. And how you transition those. Like, how do you transition a founder value-led organization so the next generation can be successful? How do you codify that culture? But it is those businesses are, there's risks with them, because, like what happens when the founder goes away, or, how, you go to YouTube, search on Peace Fans, 90% of the content is me talking, and it's, performs, really well, although my dog performs better than me. But it's in the short to mid term, or, before I die, it's a very successful lever I can pull. And so it's, a founder-led organization, they're rare, but when they work, they can be highly successful, because people want connection. Like, people really, really want to feel connected to something, and an authentic brand can be a genuine experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. But what is the answer to the question? How the succession question? Or if you've built this brand, so much of the brand is about the connection that you've been able to create with your customers. Some big private, Blackstone wants to come buy you.
Yeah.
How do they? What's the answer to that riddle?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about codifying the culture, and and I've done a bunch of work on this. How do you sort of articulate the culture? And it comes from I went to a lecture Gary Hirschberg, Stonyfield Farms gave, the yogurt company, another classic Northeast hippie led company and just how you codify the culture and then inculcate the next generation of leaders into that. And I've started that process here. And are any of them as dynamic and effective a spokesperson as me? No. But we'll at least preserve the culture. And there's ways to sort of slowly move the founder out of the picture. And there's playbooks for that. So hopefully I don't die suddenly.
Well, what is the long-term plan, if any? Are you doing this until retirement, or might there be some other, small business brokerage startup in the offing for you?
I mean, the thing with Peace Fans is, we haven't talked about this. Another sort of talking point meme, sort of thing I talk about a lot with Peace Fans is I used to move from thing to thing to thing a lot. Even at Microsoft or before that, like I would change jobs quite frequently. Just would move on to the next shiny thing, the next challenge. And I found a business within Peace Fans where I can keep innovating. I can keep adding new businesses and figuring out new businesses and launching them under the same brand. And so I think there's a lot of room to grow in that. I think there's multiple businesses we're currently looking at to add to the portfolio. There's a lot there. So I don't know, I wouldn't mind, the Baja rental program is kind of a back pocket, like build a hospitality business down there and spend 6 months there and 6 months up here in the PNW. So thinking about that, but I love what I do, so until I stop loving what I do, I don't really see myself, moving on.
Harley, is there anything else that we didn't hit on that you wanted to for this audience of business buyers about your story? I'll tee up one thing. You have said that over the years you've had former colleagues, friends who are still in corporate say to you, "How'd you do it, Harley?" What is there something that you tell them other than the mechanics of how to do this, which the audience will be familiar with, but anything spiritual almost?
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because when I first started this process, like we said initially, there was very little infrastructure around it.
Yeah.
And I thought of starting like a very boutique consulting business, like helping people leave tech, because I would get, 20, 30, the first 2 years, like, you did it. Congratulations. How's it going? How do I do it? And there's a couple components is now, there's books and, all the services you promote and are connected to, there's a financial component. There's a emotional component. There is a spiritual component to it. There's a legal component to it. There's all these components, and, it's difficult. But the journey is so worth it. I don't regret a single day. I mean, I definitely have my moments, and I mentor a lot of small business owners, and I talk a lot about every quarter, you're going to have some sort of existential crisis. Maybe it's every 6 months. Yeah, still
at this late date, you do.
Absolutely. And it's really how you react to those, is really kind of the key learning. There's no, and it's been interesting to watch over the 12 years with Peace Fans, how, I used to freak out. And now I'm just like, oh yeah, pattern matching. Like, oh yeah, that's this crisis. Like, I know how this is probably going to play out, and I know I'm on my own timeline, and don't let anyone else dictate your timelines, et cetera. But I think, to going back to your question of the colleagues, like, it's such a fun path. And if you feel pulled towards it, go for it. And there is, like surround yourself with the resources that are available and the networks that are available to give you the support to go do it. Because it is, there's definitely like challenges on the path. It's not all, you can ask my wife, it's not all fun and games.
Harley, I got to pick up what you just put down there about the existential crises. So one of the catchphrases of this podcast is the fetal position moment that many business buyers will have. They buy the business, something goes wrong in their transition or shortly thereafter, and they're terrified. They've got a big SBA loan hanging over their heads that's personally guaranteed. They've gone all in on this. It's all on the line, and they find themselves in a position that is who knows what, key employee quit, or there's mutiny, or key customer fires them, whatever. And they're really terrifying moments, and it's 2 a.m. and they're on the porcelain floor in the fetal.
Been there.
Can't sleep.
Totally been there.
Well, and not at all to minimize the seriousness. Those may well be moments that deserve such consternation, like it may be existential for the business. But it also, in many cases, what you'll hear from people who've gone through that is similar crises can happen today, 3 and 5 years into the business, and they just react differently.
100%.
So it's about building, like you called it, pattern matching, or the thickening of the skin, where that early crisis wasn't as much of a crisis as it seemed. The difference between then and now is actually their own, as business owner, their own reaction to it. Now it rolls off a little bit more, whereas the first time they encountered it, it scared the crap out of them.
Yep, 100%. I mean, it's maturation.
Yeah.
That's really, that's the maturing process. Yep.
I don't think you shared with us how big Peace Fans is by revenue. Can you share that publicly?
Yeah, we do about 10 million, 8 to 10 million. And, we definitely we took a hit with the Mercedes project. They discontinued the vehicle we built on, but we're building that back up, with Volkswagen now. So yeah, across all the businesses cumulatively, we hover around that low 8-figure, level.
Anything else, Harley? Anything else that you want to share with the audience?
No, this has been great, Will. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about Peace Fans and the journey. And you're right, it's a bit of an odd duck for you and your listeners, but I think there's a lot in there. I mean, I think, the message of hope, here's a small business and, we kind of got there, we haven't quite gotten there.
The other thing about your story, Harley, is that just the length of time you've been in the business. I mean, 12 years isn't that long, but many of my listeners will. First of all, they may not have, many of them won't have bought a business yet, but even those who have, 3, 5, 7 years is kind of the tenure that people are looking at, or at least how long they've been in it. So seeing a story that's lasted longer and you've really built into something, probably larger than many of my guests expect, at least brand wise, is also really fun to see. Harley, if people want to reach out to you, do you have a preferred way they do that?
Yeah, I would love to hear from people. People are more than, the best is just, I'm an email machine. I grew up at Microsoft. So Harley, like the motorcycle, at peacefans.com.
Great.
Following us on Instagram. And while we have people that manage that, I monitor that account pretty actively and oftentimes reply to stuff there as well.
Perfect. Harley Sitner, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. What a fun one.
Thank you, Will. Super fun. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think, what you're enabling and providing is amazing. So keep doing it.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Harley.
I will.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Harley Sitner. If you want more Harley, if you have a question for him, come to the live Q&A that we're doing with him by Zoom on Thursday, March 27th. Harley will come just to answer your questions, direct questions from you, the listeners of his Acquiring Minds interview. Register for that at the link in today's show notes or in the YouTube notes if you're watching on YouTube, or at acquiringminds.co. Come to Harley's live Q&A on Thursday, March 27th. Register for that at the link in today's show notes, in the YouTube notes, or at acquiringminds.co. See you there.